here today. Tuesday, Chuck Julian did a very fine history of the library. And we're here today to share our own memories of this or any other library that may have impacted our lives. And we're honored to have back with us, he was here a couple weeks ago, Poet Laureate of West Virginia, Mr. Marc Harshman, who will serve as our MC or host today. And so what we'll do, this is kind of experimental, but we'll have some poetry, and we'll have some memories that were specifically shared for this program that you find in the booklet from people who can't be here today. And then we'll also go to the audience here. Some of you are in the booklet, and hopefully you'll share those memories out loud today with us. So, without further eloquence, here he is, Marc Harshman.
It's a great program. I'm honored to be hosting this, as it were. I would not be here without a library. But to begin, Sean and I are both very pleased that the Governor Tomblin has sent his greetings to us all today, and so we'll start with that. As Governor, it's my privilege to welcome you to Library Memories, presented by the Ohio County Public Library in celebration of National Library Week. I'm sorry I'm unable to attend. Libraries have long been a cornerstone of our society, offering a wealth of knowledge and experience to everyone. They give us the opportunity to do anything, go anywhere, and be anyone, without ever leaving the comfort of our own chair. Doorways to faraway lands and exotic animals, they introduce us to glamorous and mysterious people. Throughout my life, the library and I have shared a wonderful relationship. Even in this age of technology, nothing can truly replace a good book. This gateway to new worlds and fresh faces helped shape who I am today, and I'm pleased to participate in this special event. On behalf of the citizens of West Virginia, I encourage you to make the most of this afternoon's festivities. You're sure to have a marvelous time. Sincerely, Earl Ray Tomblin, Governor of West Virginia. So, thank you, Governor, very much.
And we can report the legislature has passed the budget, which has slightly increased per capita funding for public libraries. It was $5. It will now be $5.09 if the governor signs it. So, doesn't veto it. So.
That is certainly good news indeed. Thank you, Chuck. Let me start with some of my own memories, and then we'll go to those of you that are here, that are in the booklet, and others that may wish to offer some remarks. My formal remarks, and some of you have heard me say this before, I was a lucky boy. I always say that to have been raised on books and storytelling, and once a week trip to town, to the farm, for groceries, always included as well the trip to the Carnegie Library there in Union City, Indiana, still standing, still used. Simply put, without that library, I would not have become who I am today, certainly not become the Poet Laureate of West Virginia. John McGarren, the Irish novelist, has written that there are no days more full in childhood than those days that are not lived at all, those days lost inside a favorite book. In part, thanks to that library and all the countless ones to follow, both humble and august, from the Sterling Library at Yale to the closet libraries and tiny schools throughout Appalachia, my hunger for books and knowledge has continued to be fed. That first little library in Indiana was the closest thing to a mansion we had in my small farming town. And for me, it was a palace, leading me up and out toward those fantastic dreams, leading me to the future I inhabit today, a future that would have been impossible without the kindly hands of a good librarian leading me to those endless treasure shelves of books. I want to say a little bit more about just what those treasure shelves contained. Children's books, for instance, have changed so dramatically since I was a boy. It's funny to look at them now. They were treasures to me, but they are nothing. Today, they're full color, and the artwork hangs in major galleries and museums across America. And much as I love Carla Green and her book, which is posted just this week, I Want to Be a Librarian. That was a whole series. I Want to Be a Farmer. I Want to Be an Astronaut. They even used that word at that time. The artwork would not be hanging in in any museum we know today. Yeah, I was raised on that. Now, Dr. Seuss we did have, and that's a whole other consideration there. He is a classic and a true treasure. I remember I died at the Hardy Boys. Whenever I had read all the Hardy Boys, I secretly went to my aunt, who was like my sister, because she's only really a couple of years older than me, and we traded. And I got all her Nancy Drews, she got all my Hardy Boys, and we swore that we would not tell anybody of our genders that we had done that. So, this is not library per se, but it sure is reading. I also remember that we would go to McClintock's, a little corner store in that small farming town where they made potato chips that came in brown paper bags with the grease stains on them. The kettle was back there in the back of the store. But they also had a great big rack of Classics Illustrated. And again, don't tell anybody, but that's where I first met Shakespeare and Sir Walter Scott and Charles Dickens, who's in the pages of Classics Illustrated. I do remember especially though that day when I told my father, which is probably not quite true, that I had read every book in the children's room. What next? And he took my hand, probably didn't take my hand, took me upstairs into the adult shelves. And I mean, that may be one of the greatest moments of magic in my life. I remember exactly what I took home that day, I really do. Dad was reading Alistair MacLean, who's no longer particularly fashionable, but you of a certain generation remember the Guns of Navarone and all those historical, pseudo-historical adventure novels. And even further back in time, Raphael Sabatini. You remember the Errol Flynn movies, Captain Blood, Scaramouche, Seahawk. That was magic. Okay. Sean said poems, only one, and then I will step back, and not my own, so you're really great for today. The amazing, wonderful poet, friend of mine, Stepping Out of Poetry by Gerald Stern. It's from the old library in the old Carnegie in Pittsburgh. Stepping Out of Poetry. What would you give for one of the old yellow streetcars rocking toward you again through the thick snow? What would you give for the feeling of joy as you climbed up the 3 iron steps and took your place by the cold window? Oh, what would you give to pick up your stack of books and walk down the icy path in front of the library? What would you give for your dream to be as clear and simple as it was then in the dark afternoons at the old scarred tables? What would we not give? Well, let me go ahead. I'm going to read just a couple from the book, and then you folks, I want to read from 2 friends. First from George Feathering. These are great literary friends, both of whom live in not only in Canada, both of whom live in British Columbia. George Feathering. The library, who was born and raised here in Greenland, the library was the key institution in my early life, far more so than school. In those days, of course, it was on Market Street, around the corner from the Y. In the foyer, there was a marble statue of Ethan Allen, the Revolutionary War hero. Ethan Allen and the Green Mountain Boys of Virginia, New Hampshire. What it was doing in Wheeling, no one seemed to know. Overhead was a sort of balcony where Ferris's huge painting of the siege of Fort Henry was displayed on an enormous easel. The stacks were open and the building was all hardwoods and marble, stately and cozy at the same time. As one entered, there was a wonderful newspaper reading room to the left that kept the homeless warm on winter days. We've been doing this a long time, haven't we? My brother and I pretty much read our way through the collection day by day and week by week, starting with the children's room upstairs, progressing finally to the racy stuff like Emile Zola downstairs. The head librarian was the local historian, Miss Evelyn. And from Keith Millard, my other Canuck friend, I would greatly enjoy reading in the Ohio County Public Library. When it was in a different building, it was a place of refuge for me all during my high school years. And I used to drive the librarians nuts, ordering strange books from other libraries. Oh, he sounds like somebody I know even better than I thought I did. Into the book. And David, if you don't mind, I'm going to ask you to read first. I think Sean had a microphone to take you out. I don't know if we need him on.
But I am going to read this. Normally A visit to the library can be a voyage of discovery. At the Mary H. Weir Library in Weirton, this writer journeyed to the center of the earth, took a trip to the moon, went 20,000 leagues under the sea, and explored a mysterious island. Jules Verne was my guide. On the 10th floor of the West Virginia University Library, I chanced upon the records of the Ohio Valley Trades and Labor Assembly. And with the assistance of Miss Golder Riggs, the archivist, those minute books became a dissertation, which I've not only earned a PhD, but embarked upon a 30-plus year career teaching and writing about Wheeling. In the basement of that same library, I discovered Africa, its rich history, its past glories. I visited Timbuktu, the great Zimbabwe, Zanzibar in Ethiopia, marched with a salt caravan across the Sahara, and searched for the source of the Nile River. On the grounds of the Iolani Palace at the Hawaiian Archives, I researched the roles of American missionaries play, for good or bad, as advisors to Hawaiian monarchs. One of the most important, William Richards, after a visit to his ancestral home in New York State, returned to Oahu by way of Wheeling, Virginia. My greatest discovery, the one which changed my life most profoundly, came in the old library of West Liberty State College. A two-story reading room with murals depicting the college's history, with oak reading tables and chairs. Alas, it no longer exists. But there, in the fall of 1964, I discovered a blonde beauty from Foxborough. Talks at those tables and maybe in the stacks gave this writer the courage to ask for a date. That date led to a courtship and an engagement and a marriage at Christmas 1966. That library discovery resulted in a union of 46 plus years, 2 children, and 4 grandchildren. So visit your local library. Your discovery may change your life, as it did mine.
Wow, who knows? Romance as well.
Mark, before we go further, I can address a couple of things that George was stating in his. The Ethan Allen statue came to the library as a gift of Mr. Peterson, the local banker, who, when he was traveling in Italy, saw it. And that's because the sculptor, Mead, Mark G. Mead, had a studio in Italy. He had emigrated from the United States, and he had done several of these statues, and so Peterson had to ship back to Wheeling from Florence, Italy. I was telling people the other day, I didn't make that connection until the other day when I started reading more about it. So how did Ethan Allen get from Italy to Wheeling? But then when this building was built, the board felt that there wasn't room for the statues, so ultimately, after a bunch of legal wrangling, it went to Fort Ticonderoga in New York, where it is now on display in their museum in their lower floors.
And Peterson's ancestor was from Vermont and fought with Ethan Allen.
So there was a connection. And the big painting that he refers to, at one time was sitting over at Independence Hall. When I was on the board back a couple of years ago, we gave it to the State Museum in Charleston. Now, whether it actually got down there from, who's on the Independence Hall board? Are you still in there?
Just an emeritus member.
Okay. They were supposed to transport it to, there was a concern that it could not be properly cared for at Independence Hall, and so they asked us, would we donate it to the museum? Now, last time I was in the State Museum, I didn't see it down there, but that doesn't mean it's not down there.
What's will happen?
So those are 2 things I
Yeah, great. That's just right. Is Carol here today? Kate, would you mind sharing your remembrance with us, please?
More impressive than the weekly trip to the library with my mother was the bookmobile. In the summer, I'd sit on the porch swing and wait for it to arrive, then practically skip up the street to choose something new. The bookmobile smelled like books, that dusty archaeological smell. Not bad, in fact, intoxicating. Don't ask what age I was. This went on from the moment I could read until I left home to enter the big wide world. A world that those books had prepared me for, enticed me to explore and created characters I could emulate. By the time I was a teenager, the woman who checked out the books on the bookmobile knew my taste and would recommend books to me. I couldn't drive yet, and here were books coming to me. Also, standing in line waiting to get on the mobile Wonderland was a social occasion where everyone shared the titles of good books they had just read. Books have played such an important part in my life that to not have one, to not be in the middle of the story, I feel deprived, desperate, and anxious to get back to the library. What will it be today? Fiction or nonfiction? Science or westerns? Classics or the newest? Or should I see that pleasant woman at the reference desk and reserve something or ask for an interlibrary loan? There's a whole world waiting for me, tucked into four walls called the library.
Ms. Laura? Some of these will make it back, so I think I want to make sure that all those who are here with us today, Margaret Brennan, I know you're here. Would you like to share with us your remembrance?
I think it's amazing that we remember some things and not others. I don't know why I remember these specific things, but I do, and not other things. And so I remember one time in the early 50s, and this was at least 50 years ago, going on 60, going up the steep steps to the Warwood Library, and I think it felt a little dark there too. I was a little overwhelmed, I believe. It was in the back building, which they're talking about tearing down. I won't like that. The lady there was so kind, and she picked out a special book just for me, Ramona. It may have been my first older girls book, because I can still recall reading it and the sadness I felt. I think it had a really sad ending. And I can't remember what the ending was. He may have died. She may have, somebody died.
They always
But I remember it just drew me in, and I wanted, of course, more. In the late 50s, I remember researching a high school paper on Robert E. Lee. I don't know why I remember this, because now I don't like Lee too much, but then I must have. And also, I think we all love that oak and marble reading room. I still mourn the fact that we couldn't keep it. It must have been important because I spent evenings in the main library reading room, and in those days, I don't think I was concerned about safety at all. I think I hopped on a bus and probably went home. Even used Douglas Southwell Freeman, who I would have no idea who he was. There was a book on a shelf, and I grabbed it on leave. And I believe I got an A thanks to the library resources. And I do remember loving the big marble statue of Ethan Allen. Thank you.
Thank you. James, Donnie?
Yeah. It's our pleasure to have the director of the Ohio County Public Library with us.
I'm a native of Mozart, a community of Ohio County. My father was a businessman working in an office in downtown Wheeling, and my mother was also a native of the city. In 1950, they built a home that sat right beside the county line. If you're familiar with Mozart and you know where the water towers are, we lived right beside them. Our home was unfortunately on the wrong side of the line. This meant I was unable to acquire a library card at the Ohio County Public Library. I tried once, and was turned away because I lived in the wrong county. I had the very good fortune to make up for this lack by acquiring many books of my own. My parents enrolled me in the Children's Book Club, with books coming every month, and my aunt donated one of her bookcases, and I set up my first library in my bedroom. By the time I was in 5th or 6th grade, I had become the librarian of our neighborhood, loaning books to all my friends and their siblings. I was quite official, with due date slips in the back, with a stamp donated by my father, all true. I still have some of my Nancy Drew mysteries with those date slips taped in the back inside cover. In the absence of a public library, I also became quite the patron of Stone and Thomas's book department. I have wonderful memories of saving up my funds until I could purchase the latest Nancy Drew, Boxy Twins, or Sherry Ames books, and savoring each new acquisition. By the time I was in high school, I had discovered authors like John Steinbeck, Jessie Stewart, and Jane Austen. My childhood books were packed away, and the classics began to fill my bookcase. I still have my first bookcase today. It sits in my living room, along with 2 other newer bookcases. All 3 are filled to the brim, and I periodically must weed my own collection.
Well, it was certainly no surprise that you became a librarian. You were on your way at an early age. I had all kinds of fillers here, and I want to make sure I get to everybody that's here today, but since Dottie just mentioned Jane Austen, I used this one right here. In Austen's Pride and Prejudice, at one point, there's this wonderful statement, "I declare, after all, there is no enjoyment like reading. How much sooner one tires of anything than of a book. When I have a house of my own, I shall be miserable if I have not an excellent library." So, Dottie, I have a feeling you have a couple of excellent libraries at your command. So, Chuck, would you mind sharing with us your remarks?
I won't need the mic. No one ever has to give me a microphone. I won't read. I'll just tell you a little bit. First of all, I think it's interesting, and libraries and librarians have debated this throughout the years, that I gained a very early love of reading because my mother read. But she didn't read the classics. She was reading romance novels and magazines with movie stars in them. But just the fact that there was reading going on in the house, I think, encouraged me to be a reader, to be a lifelong reader. So, and I don't know that she ever said, go to the library and get a book to read her. But I just knew that she was reading. Why should I read? I always loved reading. I would walk from, we lived at 37th Mill Street in South Wheeling. I would walk from there up to the Center Wheeling Library. My mother was always scared to death that something was going to happen to me, particularly in that area where the post office is now. There are a bunch of radio houses that were derelict. She thought it would get mugged, and I can imagine anyone would ever want to mug some kid from South Wheeling that didn't have 3 pennies in his pocket and he was carrying library books. Yeah, supposed to happen. I used to go and read things like this, and then I didn't steal it out of the library when I was a kid. Danny done in a homework machine. It reinforces what you just said, Mark, about the kinds of art that we used to get in art. We got black and white line drawings. There's no watercolors or anything like that. So this was a whole series of Danny Dunn, and it was a homework machine, the UFOs. I mean, it was a formula kinds of thing. But as a kid, you know, it wasn't very big. But I love reading this stuff, and it developed. We never had money to buy books when I was a kid, so I went to the library and I can very clearly remember that when you came into the building, there was that big statue of Ethan Allen. It was always so imposing to me. I'm sure I didn't know who Ethan Allen was. But if you were a kid, up the stairs you went to the children's section. You weren't invited to the adult section. Now, later maybe, I'm not sure. But, you know, it was very clear, and it was a quiet library too. You weren't encouraged to make a lot of noise. Sometimes I felt that the librarians were rather stern and authoritative, but then that could have been I was just a kid who was afraid to act up to it. But from that, of course, developed a lifelong joy of learning, and I don't ever recall doing a lot of research in the old library because there wasn't a lot of resources. For many, many years had serious budget issues, but it, of course, set the stage for a future career and profession for me.
Thank you, Chuck, very much.
Those weekly readers. Someone should be
Oh, yeah, that's...
skin and tarred and feathered for doing away with the weekly readers. I loved them as a kid.
I couldn't wait for them to show up in the mailbox. Louisville. Evan McClure. Alice Runkle. Phyllis Flynn. Joe. You have a whole little essay here.
I got carried away.
Well, no. You heard me go on.
Well, I better read it because otherwise I get it all messed up. I don't think I need the microphone either. I've had the good fortune to visit many different libraries around the world and had numerous enjoyable and occasionally frustrating experiences, many of them. One of the most memorable occurred at the Japanese National Diet at the Congressional Library in downtown Tokyo. I spent many days and hours in the library between 1972 and 1974 doing research for my doctoral dissertation, which focused on the development of the Japanese beer industry. The Diet Library operated much like our Library of Congress. You used the card catalog to find the books, magazines, or other material, submitted your request to the library staff, who went and found the material and gave it to you for use in the library. Neither I nor the ordinary Japanese citizen could take the material out of the library, and you could only ask for 3 items at a time. So it was a time-consuming process. Since it took me a long time to read Japanese text, and I had used my dictionaries a lot, I usually would look over the material quickly to see if it was worthwhile, and then have the material Xeroxed. There was a page limit on how much material could be copied due to copyright law. On any given day, I might be able to submit my request 3 times for a total of 9 items for the day. All too often I would find material I requested with little value to me, and I would turn them back in without Xeroxing. One of the nice features of the library was that they had a cafeteria, where I could take the books and look over them while I was having lunch or a snack with a cup of coffee. After spending 4 or 5 hours at the library, I would walk a mile to a subway stop to go to the English Conversation School where I taught in the evening. I would walk past the Diet Building, the Prime Minister's residence, the Imperial Palace grounds, and Hippia Park, and generally stop at a place called Jimmy Snacks for coffee and a piece of cake before going on to work. It was an altogether enjoyable routine. Some years after I finished my dissertation, I returned to Japan for a short stay and learned that a biography had been published about the first Japanese who had gone to Germany to study brewing. I searched in the new and used bookstores in the Kanda area of Tokyo to locate a copy, but failed to get one. Kanda is a section in Tokyo that's near a lot of big universities, and it has literally hundreds of bookstores. Some small, but some multi-story. I even called the author of the book, who was a descendant of the brewer, but our conversation did not go well. I mean, I was speaking in Japanese, and one of the most terrifying things is to get on the telephone and talk to somebody in a foreign language and not be able to read their face, knowing if you're making any sense at all to them. Well, I wasn't making any sense to this old man, and eventually I sort of said, sorry I bothered you, and I hung up. But then I found out that this book existed at the National Diet Library, and I only had like one more day that I could go to the library. So I went to the library, and I got the book out, and I got it copied. I got my first 30 pages copied. So then as soon as I got it back in, I filled out another copy slip, and I took it back there. And they actually even copied the second one. But when I went the third time, because the book was about 180 pages long, the librarian said, wait a minute, you've just been here. You're breaking copyright law.
Those librarian sticklers all the time.
I said, yes, I know that, but you know, I'm only here for today, and I'm going back to America tomorrow. I couldn't find this book all over Tokyo. I actually called the author, and I thought, this sob story is not going to go anywhere with this bureaucrat. But to my real surprise, he says, well, do you have the telephone number of this guy? I said, yes, I do. And I gave it to him. He actually called the old man up. And his Japanese, of course, was much more fluent than mine. And he talked to the guy for a few minutes, and he came back and he said, well, I talked to him, and he said he had received this strange telephone call. He couldn't understand what was going on. But he gives me permission to copy the rest of the book for you. I'm sorry to say that I didn't fully read that book. It's still on my shelf. It's about half read and translated. It's one of those projects that I'll do after I finish my teaching and I'm retired and I have more time. So it's still on my list of things to do. And it was a really wonderful experience, and I left the library that day thrilled with the treasure that I had, even if it isn't fully used.
Thank you, Joe. These are all so wonderful. Great idea. We're doing all right with time, so let me read another from some folks that are not here today. And let's start with this one by C.J. Farnsworth, who many of us know, a teacher and friend, a poet. C.J. writes, I grew up in Bethlehem in the 70s. It must have been on Saturdays that the bookmobile, as I remember it, that perfect shade of 1970s Brussels sprout green, came to Bethlehem Community Park. Even as an elementary school student, I could easily walk by myself, sometimes with my sister, to the bookmobile. My mother took us to the library on numerous occasions, and we regularly went to the school library at Bethlehem Elementary. But the bookmobile was different. That musty, cramped, and cluttered van gave me some inkling that there was a great world beyond Chestnut Lane, and maybe awaken the longing to be part of it. So, yes.
And if you look at the picture up above that's the first bookmobile of the library. It was called the Book Wagon. And you can see you didn't walk up into it. They just opened up the sides of it and you took books off of the shelves that way. It wasn't until later that you actually walked up into the bookmobile.
That's right. That's right. Jean, would you mind sharing your reflections, please?
Sure.
Do you want a mic?
I don't care. Whatever.
Yeah.
It's a good group as far as voice projection.
As far as voice projection. I have two early memories of libraries I'd like to share. The first memory is associated with my hometown library in St. Albans. During the summer, the library sponsored a bookworm program in which children could earn pins based on the number of books that they read. I love to read, earned a bookworm pin, and still have it to this day. Well over 50 years old. Yes, there it is. As a child, I also recall some Saturday mornings at the Charleston Library. At the time, the Charleston Library was located in a large and very imposing building in the downtown shopping district. The family would occasionally go to Charleston together, with my mother going off to shop and my father in charge of the three kids. He would often take us to the library to entertain us with microfilm of old newspapers. I can remember being amazed at the old ads showing clothes, cars, kitchen appliances, and other oddities from bygone days. Little did I know that when the history bug finally hit me, I would spend hours and hours at the microfilm machine reeling. I'm still distracted from my task at hand by the fascinating dances. Some things that some people said recalled some other memories that I hadn't thought about Bobbsey twins forever. Weren't they good? And I distinctly remember one Christmas when my grandmother got me a Book of the Month Club as a Christmas gift. And I still remember at least 3 of those books. There was No Children, No Pets, which was about a family that inherited an apartment house in Florida. And when they go down to occupy a portion of the apartment house, right there was a big sign, No Children, No Pets. And here they had a dog and a cat and all these kids. and they fried eggs on the sidewalk because it was hot. Then there was Follow My Leader, which was about a little boy who had been blinded in a firecracker accident. And the story was about him going to get a leader dog and the experiences he had with a leader dog. And then, of course, there was Baby Blue, the Blue Ox. I mean, how could we forget about the Blue Ox? And then I will say, David, I had an experience in the stacks as well.
A good or a bad
But I didn't want to have that in print, so we won't go any further than that.
Well, thank you very much.
Can you hold up your bookworm so I can get it here?
Bookworm pin, yes, there it is.
From Susan Hogan, who many of you know, and is such a devoted and wonderful
Thank you.
supporter of libraries and art and so on. Susan writes, I remember the Market Street Library and its tall ceilings, the creaky wooden floors, the wonderful scent of books, and Miss Meek and other teachers volunteering behind the desk. They were quite soft-spoken and could give a cryptic glance that leveled us all. We were there mostly for reports that should have been started 2 weeks prior, yet we somehow managed to complete them in 1 or 2 stretches. Summer was different. It was hot and muggy, and the scents were different. The books still smelled and felt good, the wooden tables and chairs hot and sticky. It's odd, as I remember the library. I place it in each season with its specific sensual memories. That last sentence is a transition to the awkward yet happy teen years spent there as well. Our current library, with its own beauty and calm, is known to me only as an adult, and I cherish those 30 years just as passionately. So, Linda, would you mind sharing with us your memories of the libraries even far north in Cook County?
I don't think I need a microphone. And just all the recollections that people have shared about the book series. Of course, I read Nancy Drew, but I also remember when I got to school, there was this wonderful series that was supposed to be for the boys that I read called Tom Swift Jr., and it was all space adventures, and it was actually more exciting than Nancy Drew. But I will share my library memories from the booklet here. My earliest library memories are of the old Brooke County Public Library, which was located in a long, narrow storefront next to Potts Hardware Store. And I mention that because on Saturday mornings, there was a routine that I would accompany my father on his regular tour of hardware stores. There were at least 3 hardware stores in Wellsburg that we visited on a regular basis, and occasionally we would become exotic and venture to Steubenville. I'm not quite sure why, but we did. But this library was located on Main Street in downtown Wellsburg. It was a tiny facility, but it was a magical place for a child with a love of books. I read my way through the children's section before heading to the young adult shelves. As a teen, I did research for term papers at several libraries, including the Carnegie Library's main facility in Pittsburgh, the Steubenville Public Library, another Carnegie-launched facility, and the Mary H. Weir Public Library in Weirton. As an adult, I treasured the opportunities to see and hear some of the nation's finest poets as they participated in the annual James Wright Poetry Festival at the Martins Ferry Public Library. Now I am building wonderful library memories every week at our beloved Ohio County Public Library, which offers a wealth of opportunities to learn, to think, and to expand one's minds through the Lunch with Books sessions, the People's University courses, the cultural events, and of course, in the pages of the many books that await our reading eyes.
Dipping back into the book, another wonderful writer living right here in Wheeling. I think probably one of the most important writers offering reflections on religious life in America today, Dr. Bonnie Thurston, also a fine poet in her own right. I've been privileged to work in some of the world's great libraries, Thomas Jefferson's University of Virginia Library, the Widener at Harvard, Eberhard Karls University in Germany, but my favorite is my first library, Raleigh County Public Library, Beckley, West Virginia, the old library in the Memorial Building. For 9 years, it was on my way home from school, the only place I was allowed to stop. Mother and I took out picture books before I could read. My first grown-up possession was a library card, my ticket to the whole world. My parents, not entirely wisely, reasoned that if we were in the public library, it was okay. So it didn't sense it when I checked out. Oh, they didn't know, did they? I checked out a lot, from Nancy Drew to a memoir of the 10 death marks. That gave me nightmares. From biography of Dolly Madison to books about West Point. I was outraged that girls could not apply. Library books open the world beyond Beckley and are a reason I am an educator and a writer. I still love the public library, and not just traditional books, but audiobooks and DVDs, public internet access, and the many creative programs. Most of all, I love the public and public library. Good public libraries are a key to universal education upon which democracy depends. Lots of people can't go to college. Everybody can go to the public library. May my education taxes always support the library. I want everybody to enjoy the free library card that long ago was so important to a little girl in southern West Virginia. I think we all say amen to that, don't we? So,
well, library funding has been in the news, and just yesterday, the Kanawha County Board of Education voted to continue funding the Kanawha County Public Library at $1.9 million. Now, that's less than what they would have gotten, but that's better than Pete Paul saying you're getting nothing from us. So they also agreed to put up an excess levy, and who knows? I mean, in these days of, you know, asking people to pay more taxes, will it fly or not?
If we could segue that into, last time on Tuesday, we also talked about the funding issue, and it was suggested that people write to their local legislators to let them know our opinions on all of this. And so Chuck found the appropriate names and addresses, and I printed some off, and if you're interested in writing to your local legislator, here's who you should write to and what you should say.
thank you very much. Is Rhonda Sellers here?
No.
Bridget, Ann? Pam? Noel Foreman?
No.
I'm here. Good. Noel, would you share with us your remarks, please?
Well,
Or if there's as much of it as you'd like.
I'm not going to read them. I've done a little more research about Mr. Sweeney. As I say, I grew up in New Cumberland, West Virginia, and Mr. Sweeney donated the ground and the money to build the library. His family is interesting. He was born in 1871 in New Cumberland. His family were in the riverboat industry. They owned boats and piloted boats. And he then studied medicine, practiced medicine in Niles, Ohio for a while. Then his brother, who had a steel industry business, invited him to join him there, and his brother became ill and died, and he took over the steel business, and it became part of Sharon Steel later.
Good.
And his estate, he gave the library in New Cumberland, the Sweeney Memorial Library, $160,000 and a $20,000 for the maintenance. And then the balance of his estate, which was $100,000, went to the library also. In doing the research, I found it interesting because I got his will, and I saw that one of the beneficiaries of his estate was a Lena Foreman, who got $1,500, as did his housekeeper. I'm thinking that this Lena Foreman probably did some housekeeping, maybe some other things, who knows. But she was a great aunt of mine. But that was interesting, and a couple of things that have just come up that other people mentioned. My first recollection of a book that I read was The Pirates of Pickled Corn. Why I remember that, I don't know. But somebody mentioned the Library of Congress, and one of my wonderful, very valuable experiences was between my junior and senior years at Bethany College. I was an intern in Arch Moore's office in Washington. And that was, I grew up in New Cumberland, I went to Bethany College, and I was in Washington, D.C. And man, did I, oh wow, I rode the bus every day to work. I got to go through the White House, and when I went through the tour of the White House, the Miss Universe for that year was on the tour. That was quite an experience. The guard kept running over to her every time we stop at a room. And I also went to one of John F. Kennedy's press conferences, this was at the State Department. It was like the reporters were on strings. He would answer a question and he would go like that. They would all jump up. It was quite an experience. I think it was one of his last press conferences. But working in his office, I did some dealings with the Library of Congress. And after I got back to Bethany as a senior, I was taking some seminars. I was a history major. And we, of course, had papers to write. And I would get a hold of Del Terry, who was one of our secretaries, and tell her what the subject was. She would get a hold of the Library of Congress and send me a paper with all the everything was, I could have just turned it in as my own. It was amazing. And they prepared that just at her request on that subject. And I have to be truthful. I didn't turn them in as my own product. I did use them for a little research. But that was quite an experience. But one other thing, growing up in New Cumberland, going through the high school, the same building for 12 years. My first grade, we didn't have kindergarten in my first grade. I cried. My parents were divorced, and I lived with my mother, my grandmother, and my grandfather. My grandfather, who was a mechanic, took me to school that first day, and I cried. He cried. Every year, as I went through the school, every 12, I'd go to second grade, and the teacher would say, I remember your first day of school. This happened for 12 years. Everybody remembered I cried. Thank you very much.
Mark, there is an interesting story about Swaney Memorial Library. Up until the last couple of years, maybe 5 to 10 years, they never accepted any public monies. They did not get any money from the Library Commission. No money. They operated on their endowments. And they were the only library in the state to be able to say, we are not taking any public money to operate the public library.
Sean.
Sorry, Sean.
There's a legend in my family that, and I believe it's true, that the kindergarten teacher called my mother and said, I've had all 9 of your children in my class and they could all read when they got here. What's your secret? And my father at one time sold encyclopedias. So we had 4 sets of encyclopedias. So we weren't allowed to ask questions, and because we knew the answer would be, have you checked the encyclopedia? So it got an encyclopedia, and the parents could answer the question. It was off to the library right then and there, which was really great. But in 5th grade, I think it was, we had an assignment where we had to, the teacher wanted us to list all the reference books in our house and how many bookshelves we had. And I ended up with 28 bookcases, and I couldn't list all of the reference books. You know, I just was too tired after several months. Anyway, she didn't believe me. And I thought, well, that's nice. I went to all this trouble. She doesn't believe me. She said, well, nobody else has 28 shelves, so nobody else has 9 kids to share them with either. So, but then I remember one of my strangest memories of the Market Street Library was I had read the children's books, I'd read the teen books, I was ready for the adult books, and I went up to the desk and asked for a book, and the librarian looked at me, and she said, I don't know if you're old enough. And I thought, you have to be a certain age to read a book? I can read, what other qualification do I need? And she said, we keep those books locked. And I said, well, call my mother. And she knew my mother, so she did. And my mother said, well, she can read whatever she wants to read. And so this librarian didn't approve, but she did go get the book for me. And to this day, I couldn't tell you what it was, or what it was about, or anything, but I remember her calling my mother. But libraries have been a fun place, and Sean has made them a delightful place to learn, and I really enjoy lunch with books, and again, we owe him a big round of applause.
You'll get a chance to read his own. Do you wish to, Sean? Or?
Well, I want to say one thing.
Yes.
The reason I didn't include a specific memory is because the one that's foremost in my mind is an unfortunate one. And it has to do with the difference between public and academic libraries. I went to Washington College of Law and American University, and I remember trying to finish a paper. We're all working on the same issue, and I went to the key law book, and all the pages I needed were removed from the book. And people ask me why I don't practice law, and I think maybe that had, I was traumatized by that. So, but I don't mean to besmirch all lawyers, but certainly the competition in law school was an unfortunate memory. But I do, as I say, I'll read it. And, you know, it goes along a lot with what Bonnie Thurston said, but my memory is more of an emotion, feeling, that anytime I went to the public library, whatever library it happened to be, especially this one, to me it felt like a hallowed place, a safe place, worthy of my respect. And libraries, more so than any single institution, in my mind, symbolize what is most admirable about our American democracy. Because anyone, as Bonnie said, rich, poor, famous, average, regardless of religion, ethnicity, anyone can access practically the full spectrum of human wisdom for free. At least that's how it felt to me. And it does not get more democratic than that. And libraries, of course, are also bastions of liberty, places that respect and preserve free thought, free expression, free access to and exchange of ideas. No democracy, at least none worthy of our admiration, can survive without the intellectual freedom that libraries guarantee. So that's why I've always loved libraries, and that's my fondest memory. I think I said that verbatim, something like that, in my job interview here. So I thought maybe it was a good thing to say. And that's my library.
Thank you, Sean. Does anyone else with anything to say? Otherwise, I will wrap this up so we all go on. Yes.
I'm not prepared like the rest of you. Okay, let me get this here. So I'm in it. All right. If I knew you were going to make a little booklet, I probably would have wrote something up. I'm going to guess and say I'm probably the oldest person in this room and the least formally educated. So I'm kind of lowbrow. But my mother said I could read when I was 3. And this, of course, this was in New York City. And she used to read to us. Renfrew of the Mountain was one of them. And my older brother would come in, and he'd, you know, out of bed when she heard me read, and he'd go on the edge of the bed there, and she'd read to us. To this day, I read to my wife every night before to help her go to sleep. I guess my reading puts people to sleep. Anyway.
So does your singing sometimes too.
Oh, yeah, well, in the nursing homes, yes. Anyway, when I say about the lowbrow stuff, I was mentioning to Sean I should do a program really on this, and that's comic books, okay? You may think that comic books is like this. Believe me, it's not. There is stuff in there that even goes beyond, you know? Anyway, as for libraries, I was always a keeper, but I never had any money. Now, I don't remember what libraries I might have gone to in Manhattan, but I'll tell you when I get to Brooklyn. The first thing I remember, this is probably 1939 or 40, I'm not sure. I was maybe 5, 6 years old, whatever it is. On the corner of the place where we lived was a little bookshop. Now, during the Depression, people did anything they could to make money. And so you had a whole bunch of fruit crates with all kinds of magazines and books and whatever he could put there, you know. And I did a bad thing. I can still see it today. Here's a woman falling down, her parachute didn't open, and Superman is going underneath to grab her. And they were 3 cents. But to me, you might as well have said $30 or $400. You know, I didn't have any money, never did. And sometimes I still don't. So I just slipped it in and took it home. And I've been paying my conscience ever since, my whole life, you know, because of that. Because I realized that poor guy, you know, all those pennies really meant something to him. And if I would have talked to him, he might have said, well, here, go in the corner, kid, and you can read them anyway. But I wanted to keep them, you see. Now, as for the type of books, I have to say I'm sorry for the folks here that got things from like the 1950s and stuff. That was a low time. The books were beautiful in the 20s and the 30s, the illustrations, and stuff from the 1800s when they were starting to print them in color, although you had to be careful because sometimes that ink would stick together in the pages like paint. All right, so while I was in, well, let's go to 139 Hull Street, Brooklyn, New York. My father went in the service because the war wasn't doing so well, and he figured it was time he got in and put an end to it. And actually, that's what happened. You know? Whether he had anything to do about it, I don't know. At 139 Hull Street, we lived in between Rockaway and Hopkinson Avenues. And I'd go down Hopkinson Avenue and take this walk, and I'm not sure, maybe it was a mile. I'm not good at stuff like that. Like I say, I'm not too well formally educated. Everything I do is by what I see. That's how I know. You know what I mean? Not the north end or the south end or something else like that. Tell them, it's the corner where this store is or where this house is there, you know. Anyway, I'd go there. Now, I don't remember any of these restrictions because there was an upstairs in the library there, and I'd go up there, and after a while, I knew where everything was. Kind of like at one time I knew where Tom's bookstore there, Paradox, he'd say, Dick, where's, I used to, no, I don't anymore. Because my own house is getting to have more books than Tom has. Anyway, the only things I can remember from that library, I did take home or even read there was Uncle Wiggily. I didn't care for Winnie the Pooh, and I can't remember too many other things. But I probably was more into my comic books, you know, at that time. But when I got to a point where I could afford the nickel for the subway, I'd go to New York, you know, the Fifth Avenue Library. Really marvelous, wonderful place. More than a library. I get, you know, if nobody's ever been there. They've got paintings up there and places where you can hide and corners, and it's, if they still have it. So they have this big, giant dumbwaiter. Looks like a big box that they bring the books up in where you go, the ones you can't take out. And what I remember is there was a certain book that I couldn't afford at that time, so I wanted to go and see at least what it looked like. Again, you might not like the subject matter. It was sort of an encyclopedia of the occult. That doesn't mean anything. Any nurse will tell you occult just means hidden, okay? Anyway, I sat there, and then she came over to and kind of whispered to me. She says, somebody stole it, you know? So the security wasn't very good, you know, over in the Fifth Avenue Library. And another thing they had, downstairs, inside a glass case, something from the Mayans. It looked like a page from a comic book. All separate, square, you know, depicting that. I'd love to bring this with me and get it. Okay, coming to over here. When I got over here, Lunch with Books was with Bonnie McCloskey, okay? And and the reason I came over was to videotape Roger Hoard, you know, that day. And when I saw what they had, I introduced myself to her, and then I did a program which ended up in the newspapers and then on Jay Leno, the only Lunch with Books from this library with all that. Anyway, somebody thought, in fact, I met the lady who sent the headline to the Jay Leno show where they do that. And right over there she was telling me, that she sent in, and she thought it was funny, okay? It said, yodeling Dick to perform Tuesday. So,
That's a great
How can you top that now?
Thank you all for coming. Let me leave you with one very quick anecdote, and we'll get out of here. From J.K. Rowling, Harry Potter. Harry, I think I've just understood something. I've got to go to the library. She sprinted away up the stairs. What does she understand? Said Harry distractedly, still looking around, trying to tell where the voice had come from. Loads more than I do, what she understands, said Ron, shaking his head. But why has she got to go to the library? Because that's what Hermione does, said Ron, shrugging. When in doubt, go to the library. Thank you all very much. Enjoy the day.
Yodeling Dick here to tell you about a happening. Lunch with books. Lunch with books, that's Coxie, Coxie, Haxie, Fraxie, yawns and sings, rocks and swings with more and more. Lunch with books. Lunch with books. At the Ohio County Public Library in Wheeling, West Virginia. It'll make you feel like yodeling. Hey, yodie, 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 hey, yodie, yodie, mostly on Tuesdays at noon. Bring your lunch, we'll provide the pot. And it's all free. Lunch with books. Knowledge is served.